this is to have such a rich and expansive response from the community. It's so wonderful to have you all here tonight. So I'm Virginia McWilliam. I have been in I've been in elementary school, and I actually got graduated to high school. And now I'm gradually going somewhere else, I guess. I'm pedagogical chair with Fran Cameron, who's the administrative chair. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the school today. And we've had a question as a faculty, because our deepest shared purpose is to serve humanity, to serve the future, to serve the very culture that we live in. And to do that, we want to strive as teachers to provide a setting where young people leave with clarity of thought, with the ability to care and connect, and with the initiative to do purposeful things in the world. And the whole of our education is for that. It's not just to teach fractions at the right time, or algebra at this time, or projected geometry here. We want to make sure we follow that academic developmental progression. But it's really much more sacred, a sacred task than that. And we know that you as parents are in that journey too. In your family, and you've come here looking for something. And we as a faculty have been asking ourselves, we've been through a process of renewal, and we've been asking, how is our education today, and how does it serve today in terms of the future? And looking out at our culture right now and seeing how quickly it's changing. So knowing that the cell phone and the personal device that's in your pocket and on your watch and everywhere you look, 10 years ago was, now it's part of our lives, and prior to that it wasn't. So many of us were raised without this kind of ubiquitous sense of technology. But our kids today are being raised in it. And what is the right gesture? What is the purposeful intention that we will take up as parents and as teachers? What serves their long-term health? That's our question. And we have been deeply involved in that, and will continue. But it's all for naught in a way. We can't create an intention in the line as a community. So we're really starting this process today, and intending to go into October, and then through the year, and then do another event in March, to see what it is we can create as a space on behalf of our students, as a school, as a community as a whole. So that's what we're starting tonight. And I'm really excited that you're interested in the question too. We are very, very lucky, because in amongst our community there are many experts, but there are a couple of experts that really can help us today. One of them is not going to speak today, and that's Susan McLaurin, who is in the audience. Would you mind just standing up for a second? Would you mind just saying like a tiny bit about yourself and a little bit of how you're going to serve this process?
So a little bit about myself. I do currently work as a professor at Westfield State, where one of the questions that we take up in our class is the question of technology. Is it serving you, or are you serving it? I also just finished a book on children and technology, but really how I came to all of this was through my own two children. So I have a 19-year-old and a 21-year-old that both just left home for the first time. And when I think about what it is that I'll be bringing to this community is, through the parent series, an opportunity for us as a community to get together, to pause, to reflect, to ask some of these deeper questions about how the technology is impacting our children and our lives. And I think, I was at a staff and faculty meeting last week, and I think one thing that I would just really want to impart to everybody is what I heard so much from the faculty is how much this community really wants to support the parents in this endeavor, and to really make sure that the parents also know that this is not about doing it in any particular way. This is about finding your way in your family, with the focus being on what matters most to you, what really serves the real needs of your children and the real needs of your family. And so I just would really encourage, if anybody is interested in doing this, this is not going to be about do it this way or not do it another way. This is about really supporting you in finding the way that best serves you and your family. So thank you.
So Susan is going to be running a series of workshops with parent workshops. So, but tonight we're all here to begin with our very own Mr. Charles or Chip Weems, who is a long-time Hartsbrook High School teacher. He has taught geology and meteorology and astronomy and computer science. And we feel very, very grateful for his presence, because he is he's a polymath and very, very competent and capable and a wonderful teacher. So his real gig is at UMass, where he's a computer science teacher. And he also works very closely with, OSNR is an association of Waldorf schools, so through OSNR he's been working with other Waldorf schools around this topic. And then also we have something called the pedagogical section, which is a group of teachers who are committed to sort of really deepening the research into teaching, and Chip is part of that and working with this theme in this pedagogical research. So, Chip, welcome, and thank you very much.
I apologize, we're getting started a little bit late, so this is probably going to run pretty long. I planned on half an hour. So, one of the questions that we often hear, and when I visit other Waldorf schools, they're also hearing from parents is, they're questioning, will my child be prepared for life in a digital world? And you hear that question, you have to ask, what does that really mean? And oftentimes the parents aren't sure, but oftentimes it also comes down to that they're really wondering, will you teach my child the computer skills that they're going to need to be competitive in their career when they graduate? That's a real worry, because having computer skills is really important in today's job market. So, as a professor of computer science who has written 28 introductory computer science textbooks, which back in the 1980s defined the way that computer science was taught worldwide, and was working as part of a 7-institution consortium developing a new computer science curriculum internationally. So I know something about this. I can assure you that the answer is absolutely not. So I want you to consider that 10 years ago, the iPhone was announced. Same year we graduated our second high school class. And if you had asked me back then, will those students be prepared for writing augmented reality apps in Swift 4 for iOS 11 on Xcode 9, I would have said, what? So remember, the iPhone had just been announced. Apple hadn't even committed to having third-party apps written for it. The Swift programming language didn't even exist. Augmented reality was a small part of the virtual reality research field, which was itself a small part of computer science research. So none of the currently hot technologies existed or was specifically envisioned 10 years ago. So what we're seeing today really embodies whole new paradigms of both software and hardware. There was no way, and there is no way today, that I could specify what we should be teaching today's 7th graders in order to prepare them for their careers when they graduate from college in 10 years. And it would be a waste of their time, because whatever we would teach them would be obsolete. The good news is we don't have to teach them those skills. Okay? Our students are going to be able to figure it out on their own. All right? So I'm teaching a 10th grade computer skills class right now. Spent 2 periods showing them the ins and outs of Google Docs, and they're off creating documents that have amazing formatting. Right? I had an incident in an 11th grade class meeting. We're planning a Halloween party, right? And these students had that class the previous year. And as we're discussing the food, one of the girls says, "Oh, we don't have to talk about this anymore. I've already created a Google sheet that's got all your names in it, and just put in how much sausage we do, and it'll tell you how many people we can feed." They get it. In 11th grade computer science, when they're writing their Java programs, it's all very exciting. I mean, it's wonderful stuff. They're having a great time doing it. They get it, right? They can adapt to this. But technology is in a state of constant flux. In fact, in computer science, we describe it as churn, right? It's just constantly churning over and over and over. And it's really exhausting trying to keep up. In fact, it's impossible to keep up. Right? There's just so much of it. So working with technology today requires a different mindset. It requires a fearlessness to be able to jump in at any point. And you have to have an open mind to a lot of different options. And you have to have a capacity for discerning what's going to work and what's not going to work. And you have to have extremely flexible and creative thinking. Because what you're going to do is you're going to gather a lot of very sophisticated pieces of technology and try and weld them together into a working whole. So that's a different view of technology than you're going to see in most places. All right, so this leads to a critical capacity that our children need, which is flexible, creative, open-minded, fearless thinking. So how do we give that to our children? Well, not by going the path that the Computer Science Teachers Association has been proposing, which is to teach computational thinking earlier and earlier, even down into kindergarten. Computational thinking is actually a fairly narrow kind of thinking. It takes everything that you have and tries to organize it into a sequence of steps, one after the other, discrete steps, which relies considerably on understanding cause and effect. And if you read Piaget or Steiner or any of a number of other child development specialists, they'll tell you that cause and effect doesn't really become a capacity we have access to until at least 6th grade. And it doesn't really blossom until high school. So you're wasting their time trying to teach them these things earlier than that. You can do it, right? And they're trying to prove that you can. But it's really not helping. So if you consider what gives us flexibility in thinking, you realize that our thinking is limited mainly by our capacities for expressing it. So we think in languages. And so to gain more flexibility, to gain greater capacities for expressing different kinds of thoughts, you need to develop more languages. Now, certainly more spoken languages is one way of doing that. That gives you different spoken languages, but there are additional languages. And it's important to begin studying these at the point in development when children are most flexible in their language centers, right? When they're most able to take up these languages. Right? So not just the spoken languages, but there's also the language of music, the language of form, the language of color, the language of movement. Even textiles have a language. Wood has its language. Clay and stone and glass have languages. Nature has many languages. So it's much more important to learn these open-ended languages, right? To increase our capacity for expressiveness, which gives us this flexibility and creativity, than it is to be teaching them the restrictive forms of computer languages. Right? Then students reach the threshold of puberty, which is a place where they're actually very vulnerable. Right? It's been likened to the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. Right? It's at that stage where it's messy and it's kind of ugly. And it's susceptible to all kinds of things, right? And it doesn't want to be looked at. Right then. And so it's very vulnerable. And there are a lot of aspects of technology that are probably not the best thing to be meeting those vulnerable beings with at that point. That's where they need to be held in community, and they can be held by strong adults who help to guide them through that. Betty Staley, a famous Waldorf educator, has described it as a very narrow bridge with temptations on either side trying to pull them off. And they need to be led to the other side of that. Now, once they pass through the initial throes of that, which are the most difficult, then, and having worked with all these different languages and so forth, they've developed some strong, flexible, creative thinking foundations. And so, the high school, we begin working on capacities of judgment. Who would accuse teenagers of having really good judgment? Sometimes they do, but oftentimes they don't. And volition, meaning the fearlessness to jump in and actually act. At this point, they're actually ready, really ready, to start understanding the inventions of the human mind. And Steiner actually describes it that way. And he says that in high school, the focus of the curriculum should heavily emphasize technology, because if students don't understand the technologies they'll rely on, they'll be enslaved by them. That's why we have a 4-year developmentally based computer science curriculum in the high school. Right? So in 9th grade, they learn about what a computer is. In 10th grade, they see how it works. In 11th grade, they learn about why the internet is the way it is, why it's there are precautions you need to take on it, and they learn why software is so hard to get right. And in 12th grade, they learn about who we are with respect to our technology. We look at the societal and psychological impacts of technology, and then we also contrast artificial intelligence with human consciousness. So, as an example, in 9th grade, when we start looking at what computers are, a lot of that has to do with what is digitization. So everything on the computer and on the internet has to be digitized. That is, it has to be turned into a set of numbers. And so, here's an example of some digitized data. It's a bunch of numbers. So what is that? so these are actually pixel values. And so the ninth graders learn about how this translates into an image by taking different grades of pencils and coloring it in, according to a grayscale they're given. And so then they would discover that it looks like that. Now, how is it that you can even see that as an eye? It's just a bunch of gray squares. It's really crude. And the answer is that human beings are very adaptable. Right? We've adapted to the machines to be able to see that. All right? To understand how much we've adapted, consider that when Brunelleschi was working with single point perspective, he had to teach people to be able to see his paintings. But that set the stage for photography. Right? Along the way, theater in the round went behind the proscenium arch. Right? And then you could hang a screen in that picture frame, and you could project images on it, which then would move. Jumpily, but they move, and you fill in the gaps. And then you take that and you shrink it down to a TV screen. You take the life-size things and you shrink them down into a smaller screen. And you shrink them down further until it's a window on a smartphone. Right? In contrast, Arthur Zients talks about some friends of his who were healthcare workers. They went to visit a primitive culture to give some guidance to women there about some hygiene care with taking care of infants. And they brought along a slide projector, and they had a very nice slideshow where they showed women, doing various things, taking care of their babies. And they pointed out what was going on and so forth. And at the end of the talk, they invited some of the women to come up. And through the interpreter, they asked them what they thought of the slideshow. And they said, well, it was interesting, but we couldn't understand why you kept talking about people and pointing to this flat thing with a bunch of pretty colors on it. That's how far we've adapted. Another area is in artificial intelligence. There's a thing known as the Turing test, which says that if a computer can communicate with you by text and trick you into believing that it's a human being, that's gained a form of artificial intelligence. Right? And there's an annual competition. And about 3 years ago, one of these programs, they're called chatterbots, one of these chatterbots won the competition. It convinced the judges that it was more likely to be a human being than the human beings who were trying to communicate with them. And in the post-game analysis, they discovered that it wasn't that the chatterbot had improved its ability for discourse. It's that in that time, people's expectations, because of texting, for what a conversation with a person would be like, had diminished to the level that it felt more natural to communicate with a computer than with an actual human being who had real thoughts. That's how much we've adapted. So, you can zoom out on this. And you look at this and you say, well, this is a young woman and there's a light source over there, right? No, it's just a flat screen, a bunch of gray squares on it. She's an alumnus from the class of 2006. And one of the reasons I use this image is it reminds me to talk about how her father, who was an art professor at the University of Hartford, took about a 15-year leave, and he was raising her and do children's books. And then after that, he went back to the University of Hartford. And what he found was, much to his dismay, was that color exercises he had used before he left the university, the students could no longer do. They no longer had the capacity to see the subtleties of color that they used to 15 years previously, because they were spending so much of their time in front of screens that had limited color palettes. And you had to spend much more of the introductory art classes teaching them to see color. So just to contrast this, what I'd like you to do now is I'm going to ask you to turn and look at the person to your right. Now this means you're going to be looking at the back of somebody's head. Or you may have to, if you're at the right end of the row, you have to turn around and look at somebody in the row behind you or the row in front of you. But I'd like you to do this, right? Just turn and look at that person to your right. And I'd like you to take in what it's like to be looking at a real human being. The detail, right? The detail in the hair, the way the hair moves, the way they're breathing. Right? All of the subtleties that you get from seeing a human being. And now I'd like you to close your eyes and reach out with your other senses and sense the presence of that human being next to you. Okay, thank you. I hope you can appreciate this is not something we can digitize. The result is that technology actually separates us. It makes us think we're communicating with other people. If you know the person, if you know them well, you fill in many of the details that are lost in the digitization. If you don't know the person, you fill in the details by projecting yourself onto that person in some way. So instead of seeing them as an individual human being, as you've experienced your neighbor just now, you tend to see them as some kind of a genus, as a gender, as a ethnicity, as race, as political party, particular age, particular culture, particular nationality. And then, when that person fails to behave according to what you consider to be the norms of the genus you perceive to be a part of, maybe multiple, that leads to conflict. Interestingly enough, Steiner, in a lecture entitled Arts and Technology, actually said, wherever two or more are gathered through technology, there will be conflict. And it's true. One of our seniors did a research project over at UMass. She passed out 100 questionnaires, and very diligently went around and made sure people filled them out, collected all 100 of them. And of those 100 questionnaires, every one of those college students had experienced conflict online. Many of them had never resolved that conflict. They had simply stopped communicating with the person whom they had the conflict. But those who did resolve the conflict, 100% of them had done it in person. More communication online had not succeeded. There are plenty of studies that show that the more time people spend on social media, the more psychological measures of their sense of isolation rise. This leads also to a lack of trust, and it also leads to fear. And there was an interesting study that just came out today. If you read the thing that came out from the school, some researchers in Australia have just found that small children who are interacting a lot with images on screens at a particular developmental stage where they would normally be tuned in to picking up an understanding of facial expressions, lose that capacity. And in later life, have more trouble making friends and managing relationships because they don't get those cues. Even though they've been watching, videos of people online. So this is another one of the necessary capacities. So the ability to see people as they are, and correspondingly to know what is lost by digital communication. So how do we give our children that capacity? Well, obviously, in early childhood, we want them to play with real children and be around adults who are good role models. And then when we get into the elementary school, we want them to have to be in a caring community. We want them to have experiences of drama where they get to try on different personas. We want them to do things like arrhythmia, where they just discover this sense of being able to feel the people around them. We want them to develop their thinking capacity through their feelings, to have warmth in their thinking. And then in the high school, they can go on a 3-month exchange and spend 3 months immersed in another culture. And they also will have a trip to a Camp Hill where they get to spend a week working with developmentally disabled adults and discover that they're really not disabled. And it really redefines your perspective of what a human being is. So another aspect of the digital technology is this example. So what color is that?
Black.
Yeah, so you can probably say that's black. I want you to look carefully at that. All right, keep your eye on it. It's a white screen. Nothing changed. It's a white screen. So again, part of our adaptation is through technology. We can be tricked into thinking that white is black. So Kellyanne Conway took a lot of flack when she said there's no such thing as facts anymore. But the truth is she's right. No, seriously. She's right. On the internet, there's no such thing as facts. There's only data. And data can be manipulated to falsify nearly anything. And we've adapted really well to believing a lot of those falsifications. See, facts are grounded in reality. But in the digital realm, there's no reality. There's only virtual reality. Online, our children will constantly be facing things like fake news and misinformation, propaganda, marketing hype and exaggeration, clickbait, right? And even subtler attempts to manipulate them. So on Facebook, when you like things, Facebook makes sure to give you only newsfeed items that are things you would like, which reinforces your view of the world. And this can result in what psychologists describe as a cognitive bubble. Right? You can end up only going to sites that give you things you like. You can build your own virtual reality around you. And they're finding that what happens then is people from two different cognitive bubbles who collide can't believe what the other person believes. Right? How could they believe in those facts? How could they believe in those facts? Don't they know those are lies? Don't they know those are lies? Because there are no facts on the internet. So another critical capacity is the ability to distinguish reality from fiction. How do we develop that in our children? Well, obviously, maximize their experiences of the real world. Right? So in early childhood, we have them play in nature and play with other children. And we have adults they can imitate who are grounded in their sense of reality and comfortable with it. And they get to do real chores, they learn about real work, they imitate the teachers doing the real work. In elementary school, we continue those real experiences of nature, right? Plus they get to do things like handwork, right, where they're really feeling those things. They're doing art and music, and they're learning science through experiential approaches. They go on lots of field trips, they learn outdoor skills, they learn cooking and gardening and animal care. All of these things are building their confidence in their capacity to meet the real world. And then in high school, we continue with experiential science, history that's based on symptomatology, and research skills to distinguish truth from fiction in sources, and practical arts, where they work with their hands with real things, and analyzing current events, learning mathematical reasoning and logic, studying arts that develop their capacity to really see, right? And of course, direct study of the technologies that they depend on. So one of the reasons we have so much fake news is because of this disconnectedness online. Right? People feel that disconnectedness, which gives them a feeling of anonymity. And they do things online that they would never do in person, or if they thought they'd get caught. And the internet offers a lot of temptations. A lot of temptations, especially for adolescents who are coping with some very powerful emotions and a lack of judgment. Yet at the same time, we're under constant surveillance. We're being tracked by many companies and agencies and organizations across the internet. Eric Schmidt, one of the founders of Google, is famous for saying, "We know where you are, we know what you're doing, and we have a pretty good idea of what you're thinking." Mark Zuckerberg said simply, I'm blanking on the word. You have no privacy. Get over it. And this digital record, this online digital record, can come back to haunt you. There was a case just recently of a congressional race in the South where one of the candidates found that his opponent had discovered a video of him doing a drunken dance in college wearing a Darth Vader mask and he was playing it over the air continuously. And he lost that race. So we're leaving this permanent record from the first day we go online, which can come back and haunt us later. And so teens, of course, have this sense of invisibility and also this need to impress their friends, and that turns out to be a pretty bad combination. It's all supported. Especially if college admissions offices or job applications run into it. So another critical capacity is a strong sense of morality. Again, in early childhood, the teachers spend a lot of time working on their inner development because they have to be worthy of imitation by those children, right? They know that children are hypersensitive. They pick up on every little thing, including, their inner life. Small children are just total sense organs. They see everything, and they take it and they soak it up like a sponge. So the early childhood teachers are always working on developing themselves, and being able to hold themselves present in each moment, and to make moral choices in all the actions that they do around children. And so those who have developed a healthy relationship to technology through understanding it also provide that as an example to the children. Now in the elementary school, where we develop morality is through regular experiences of beauty. Beauty is the feeling reference for our moral choices. And you need to make a moral choice if you have a good sense of what's beautiful, and a good sense of what's moral. That's why decorating the classroom is so important, and why the chalk drawings have to be so perfect. Right? Why they study art and music and movement and nature. Why the quality of the materials is so important. And the teachers are guiding the class as a caring community. And then there's actually the pedagogical material, the fairy tales, the fables, the heroic stories, the mythology. All of these are carry moral touchstones that the children will be able to go back to subconsciously in later years when they face these moral choices. And then in the later years, of course, as they enter puberty, teachers are dealing with all kinds of interpersonal issues and difficult choices. And one of the ways that helps to take the pressure off there are plays that let them explore their feelings by taking on alternate personas. In the high school, we have literature that explores moral themes. We see the moral choices that affect history. We continue to work with art and drama. We increase the kind of service work that we do. And of course, we also engage in direct study of technology and its effect on our society and psychology. And there's much more of an emphasis on community beyond just the class. Again, we're also developing judgment here. So another aspect of technology is its instant gratification. Right? And this can lead to intellectual laziness and a lack of curiosity. I encountered this just last week. Right? I was shocked by it. I'm teaching a seminar at UMass on Steiner's philosophy of freedom. A couple of our alumni are at UMass, and they had asked that I offer this seminar. So there are a bunch of honor students in this, not just them. And they said, and so as we're going through it, there's one point where you have to try and get a sense of what's a pure percept. Normally you perceive something, you immediately attach a concept to it. So I showed them this image, which is very hard to grasp at first. Right? It doesn't make sense. It's a pure percept. It's very frustrating. You struggle to understand what's in the image. And these honor students, they looked at the image for about 5 seconds, and they put it down, and they looked at me. And I said, I'm not telling you what's in it. The objective here is to have this experience of struggling with this until you find the concept. So they picked it up and they looked at it for another 15 seconds or so, and they put it down, and they just sort of stared off into space. Except for our two alumni. Right? And they do this exercise from 12th grade computer science, so they were actually into it. They were really into it. And they were actually like, come on, look at this thing. You can't just do that. And I said, you've got to try and figure this out. Pick it up, try turning it different ways, hold it at different distances. And they're like, oh, okay. And so they're, kind of, okay, I did that. Didn't come. There was no curiosity. One of them actually wanted to take out his cell phone and see if he could use the Google image search. Find out and tell him what it was. So what is it? Okay. So another capacity is having curiosity and volition. That is the willpower to act on your curiosity. So again, in early childhood, the teachers are doing work that the children can imitate and join in on. In the elementary school, they have chores, they have handwork, they have practical arts, they have things that require sustained effort and practice, like music and drama. And the whole year is organized in rhythms at different levels that support them in developing their willpower. And in the high school, they continue to have chores and practical arts, they do more service, they engage in larger projects, they're doing research, they have longer writing assignments, there's a big value placed on taking initiative, and in some classes we actually do build development exercises. So for all the challenges that the technology presents, right, and let's just review them. There's the constant churn, right, of the relevant skills. There's the temptation to intellectual laziness. There's the constant surveillance, combined with the temptation to give in to your lower impulses. There's the misinformation, the conflict, the separation that reduces others to genus instead of individual and creates cognitive bubbles, the loss of human connections and trust, right? And then this regressive kind of adaptation that we do. If our children develop capacities to rise above this, they can actually evolve our species to a new level of consciousness. In that sense, technology is a gift. And Steiner actually foresaw this trajectory that we would head down with technology. In a piece entitled From Nature to Subnature, he says that as much as technology presents the potential to drag us down, it enables us to rise above our nature, to develop a higher level of consciousness. Those same capacities lead us on the path toward free will. You may have heard Walter education described as an education towards freedom, and that's really what we mean. So the more technology tries to make us more like it, the more we need to develop our humanity. And because Steiner foresaw this, he designed the Waldorf curriculum to prepare children for life in a technological age. Now, of course, the technologies have changed since the 1920s when we designed the curriculum. And the curriculum has evolved to some extent. But in this year, the faculty here are engaging in a year-long study to review the curriculum in light of our understanding of technology. And we want you to come on that journey with us. So I just want to close by telling you the story about where the title of this talk came from. We had a student who came to high school. She had been in a different school every year of her life and was bullied out of her last school and then landed here and stuck. And by senior year, she had composed a short story that was the centerpiece for the Massachusetts High School Magazine of the Arts and an amazing senior project where she composed an album of songs. Now, that year I was teaching the 12th grade child development class with John Case, and there's a point where we say to the seniors, do you have any questions about your education? And one of them said, well, so how would you describe to someone else what Waldorf education is in like one short sentence? And we were like, and this girl looked at us, almost incredulous, and said, it's a human education. It's a human education. And that's what our children need to be prepared for life in the